Sounds good. Who's doing the intro?
Oh, we're just going straight into it. What's up, guys? Ben McElroy here. You're back on episode 12 of an intelligent discussion. Thanks for being here. We got Jared, Will, and Justin on the recording. How we doing, boys?
Doing great, considering it's been like a year.
Doing great.
We can't keep us down, baby.
No, you cannot.
Time will not defeat this podcast. Let me tell you what, guys. We're so glad to be back. Looking forward to a interesting episode, all technical audio and visual problems aside. Different format from my understanding today. I think we're going to hand the reins over to Will first and let him kind of get in.
Right.
The plan today is to discuss various topics that we've all prepared ahead of time and basically set it up in a instructory discussion where we can intervene and ask questions whenever, but really it's going to be Will's show for the next little bit.
It's a terrible decision.
Excellent.
Everyone's going to turn the video off. After
Correct. Actually, you're right. Maybe we should have Will at the end. No.
There you go. So the way Ben described is, yes, we all have topics that we thought were interesting and we wanted to share with our friends. So we did a little reading up on it. We're going to speak a little bit on it. And then if these guys have questions or comments, then we're going to field those. So as Ben said, I will be going first. And I think that we should colonize Antarctica because it's going to give us great practice for when we colonize Mars and the moon.
It's like a hard jump.
It is a hard jump. Explain yourself.
So Antarctica is basically another world that's still part of our world. And if we have large-scale human habitats on Antarctica, it's going to use pretty much the same dome technology that's been proposed for both Mars and the moon. They're extreme environments, not conducive to human life as we know it. And once we practice maintaining those colonies, it's going to give us, practice strokes maintaining like an isolated society with limited resources, and that's far away from help.
That's not bad. I don't disagree with that at all.
How do we start?
And as global warming or climate change or whatever we like to call it these days continues to progress, some scientists say that by the beginning of next century, the most northern parts of Antarctica could be like Alaska or northern Scandinavia, which could mean that we won't need domes in Antarctica to live there. And if it continues to get worse, just going to completely ignore what's going on the other end of the world, if Antarctica becomes habitable, which would be bad for the rest of humanity, that we could probably farm there too, because this is an entire continent that is completely, well, not completely, but almost completely devoid of human life. And if it were to become habitable, I mean, that would become the new frontier.
So over the next couple of centuries, we're changing Antarctica from a frigid, cold place, and it turns into something like Montana, like that same environment too. Or think about the weather change though. It's you have a couple of months of the year where it's nice out, but after September, it's cold, very, very cold to be outside.
It will always be cold in Antarctica. It's going to go from a desolate, inhospitable wasteland to just a very cold place.
To a semi-desolate, inhabitable.
Yeah, semi-desolate, inhospitable wasteland. But considering the fact that we have isolated human settlements and research outposts and military bases in Antarctica right now, I mean, we have decades of experience maintaining these small little enclaves of humanity pretty much as far away from society as you can get without leaving the planet. All we have to do is just extrapolate what we already know from maintaining those societies and make them bigger. And then once we get to the point where we want to put a research station on Mars or have a permanent human presence on the moon, then those huge mistakes that would be way more expensive in both money, material, and human lives on Mars or the moon wouldn't cost so much once we learn them in Antarctica.
I like the idea of this as a trial run because I feel like if we are going to go to leave the confines of our planet, we should have some kind of plan in place. We should have something to base it off of because it's a lot easier from a logistical standpoint to ferry supplies or support a colony that's on Earth than one that's not on Earth and then experiences catastrophic failure.
Yes.
Interesting.
And I will expand on something that I said earlier is as the globe continues to warm and the ice around Antarctica continues to melt, if Antarctica ever becomes habitable in a sense, the entire continent were all of a sudden the Midwest or Alaska or Scandinavia, like the rest of the planet would pretty much be destroyed as we know it. And the entire global ecosystem would be completely different, and there would be massive die-off, and it would be hugely unstable, and it would be a lot of time before that new both global and weather economy that surfaces from that would stabilize. So just going to leave you guys with that. But for where we are for the next century or so, we could do it on a small scale, but way bigger than what we're currently doing.
I think you're absolutely right. It's an interesting thought experiment, and it's also very interesting from a simulation of, leaving the confines of the Earth. How would setting up an outpost or a colony on Mars or the Moon, how would that go? Because we could in essence simulate certain aspects of total disjointment from the Earth, as far as, hey, like, we're going to put these things into place, and if a failure happens, or if we were to put a dome or a simulated atmosphere in place, and there was a breach, obviously that's the end of everything that's not in a secondary or tertiary enclosure outside the Earth. But on Earth, that would be a oopsie whoopsies. Let's take extra safety measures to make sure this doesn't happen for real. So I see the value in a life-saving long-term effort for sure.
I'm gonna bounce another idea off you guys that this is pretty much as fiction as it gets, but let's assume that we go forward with this colonization thing, and there is a large, maintained, permanent human population in Antarctica from multiple nations. Now, today, there have been 11 people born in Antarctica since 1978. If we have thousands of people that live there constantly, or tens of thousands, maybe even we get to the point where we have hundreds of thousands of people, which is, pretty much fantasy at this point. But as more and more people become born in Antarctica, will an Antarctic identity form? I mean, this is something that I brought up in an earlier episode when we were talking about Mars colonization. But when you have more and more people that are born, die, and have children, and have spawned generations of people that live exclusively in Antarctica, if both of their parents are from Chile, they're not going to identify with Chile forever. So what happens when this Antarctic like I said, it's pretty much fiction, but this Antarctic nationality or this identity begins to generate? What's that going to do for the global political economy?
I'm glad you talked about the Mars colony, because I remember you mentioning that, and it seems like the Antarctica thing is kind of like a microcosm of that, that would happen on Earth. I personally feel like it would kind of be the same situation as America. I guess, there are people who are like, I'm German, or I have German ancestors, or I'm Italian, or I'm Scotch-Irish, or whatever. But in reality, they're American. And if you asked them, they're American. And so I think people would identify their roots, I guess, the same way Americans often annoyingly do. But they would probably identify as Antarctican, unless it was somehow established that Antarctica was no longer, if it was made extremely clear that this is part of America or whatever. I mean, it's the same thing about a satellite territory from America. If you're born in Guam, are you American, or do you think you're from Guam, or how do you think? The same Puerto Ricans, I think they consider themselves Puerto Ricans, and also technically still a territory, but same argument.
The children that are born on military bases, yes, they're U.S. citizens, but how often or how long are you going to be stationed there for? Is your dad or mom going to be there for 20 or 30 years, and you just grow up in Japan? Do you identify as Japanese, or are you an American?
Great point. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. I think there'll be a breed of ice Nazis.
Well, I was going to say, not ice Nazis, but I was going to question, would sovereign nations whose citizens go to this Antarctic base or to any, extraterrestrial outpost or colony, would they allow the breakdown in their national identity and their national sovereignty? If America and China, through a joint coalition somehow send 150 people each to a small outpost on Mars, are they now going to be Martians, or are they and their descendants going to be American and Chinese, foreign nationalists.
Like dual citizenship in a way. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Citizenship.
I would say it would be, well, they would be American and Chinese until their children have children.
Yeah.
Because
Until
then,
all you
like,
know.
yeah, and then because that grandkid would have grown up, spent their entire life on Mars, as would have their parents, and that grandkid spawns his own offspring, then you have what, 3 generations of people who were born, lived, and died on Mars.
Okay.
They're not going to have any ties to Earth beyond what's told to them.
True. Absolutely.
Same thing with Antarctica.
Do you think that it would go in such a way where Mars, conceptually or realistically is colonized as a separate entity with either new nations, or would it be America goes to Mars and seizes this chunk of the planet as American national territory?
Well, Mars would be colonized, and I would imagine that it would be organized in the territorial sense, kind of like what we already do with Guam and Puerto Rico, where this would be, I don't know if it would like be U.S. sovereign territory, but we would plant an American flag on it. There would be Americans there, and we'd have "Made in America" probably stamped on every structure that we put up there. So it would be pretty hard to debate that it's not.
Would Americans really be building the structures on Mars?
I would hope so, that they'd be fabricating them themselves.
Yeah. Who else? China?
I
India?
was going to make a very poor and chaste joke about bringing with us some laborers.
Hispanics, I'll say it.
Some North American
Does Mexico even have a
citizens'
space
friends.
program?
I
Say it
hope
again?
not.
Does,
He asked if Mexico has a space program, and my response is they should solve their drug cartel problem before they invest in.
This has to be like a South Park episode where like Mexico goes to the moon. Like this has to be something on South Park for sure.
Yeah, reference this in 50 years when Mexico has the first Mars colony.
Correct.
Oh man.
I remember saying something very pro-American in one of my French classes in high school, and I was like, and this is why France never went to the moon or something, and she got so butthurt, and she was like, actually France has one of the most advanced aerospace groups in the world or something like that, and I was like, yeah, well, you guys do math, stupid, and she was just kind of at a loss for words.
Bro, could you imagine a Mexican Mars colony and they're importing all these Americans, and then there's angry Mexican nationalists complaining about Americans taking Mars jobs?
That's
Wow.
that's
That's a South
dystopia
Park
right there.
episode.
That's insane.
Oh, how the
If NAFTA went the other way around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, Jared or Will, do you feel like we've had sufficient discourse on your topic? Are we ready to jump ship here?
Yeah, we're good.
We should not be jumping out of any ships when we're talking about extraterrestrial travel, by the way. That is a no-no as far as the safety protocol.
Space is a vacuum, absolutely.
Space is a cold, desolate wasteland that doesn't love you or respect you.
Who told you
Cool.
that, Space?
Space is mom. Okay. Well, cool. Obviously, we can reference back or jump back into any of those topics at any point. We'll hand the reins over to Jared and get into our even more controversial of a topic. That was surprisingly not controversial from Mr. Wilfick. We pleasantly surprised.
Don't worry. My
Yeah, for
topic
those
is
who
gonna
don't
drag it
know,
out of Will.
that goes against the grain for my track record.
Correct. We were expecting much worse.
He'll have his opportunity. Don't you worry.
Correct. It's coming up. Just you wait. If this
yeah.
video wasn't
I'm ready.
demonetized already, here it comes.
I'm ready.
Jared, what do we got?
So I want to talk about the Red Sea conflict that's been going on for the last couple of months now, and so I brought this. I'll read off my list of notes here. So I want to talk about a story in particular that's like paints the picture of what's going on. So this was an article that I read from NPR a couple days ago, but December 30th, there was a shipping vessel that was going through the Red Sea, and it was attacked by like 4 Houthi like small like fishing vessels or boats or something like that. So who are the Houthis? So there is this Western Iranian-backed group based out of Yemen that
They're
is
terrorists,
going
is what
after.
they are.
Yeah, they're terrorists. So
Not one of
they're
those words.
yeah. They're based out of
The Trump administration labeled the Houthis a terrorist organization in 2020.
Well, we're treating them like terrorists now. Before we
Yeah,
weren't.
they're getting the terrorist treatment for sure.
Yeah. But before we never like fought back. This is the first time we're actually like recognizing them as a group that can like, do damage, and so now we're fucking them up a little bit. So they're just basically attacking a bunch of ships in the Red Sea. So the story talked about the U.S. and the forces that it's bringing down to the Red Sea, and it's kind of startling because like the amount of force that they're bringing in, as well as their allies they're bringing in with them too. So the U.S. right now has 3 ships. They have the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the USS Gravely, and the USS Laboon, which are 2 missile deploying destroyers. So through the Red Sea, that's a lot of firepower that's going up against like these just very average boats. Like they're not coming in with like other cannons or other stuff like that. They're just going in with boats they can find and just personal arms. So, needless to say, the Houthis are outmatched right now in this battle, but they're still trying to like sink a bunch of these vessels. And they stopped travel for about a month or so of most of the Red Sea. So most ships aren't passing through. When you're talking about these major companies that are trying to make sure their boats aren't going to sink, most of them have turned away from using the Red Sea as an option of travel. So that means going around the Horn of Africa, and it takes an additional like 2 weeks essentially to the average amount of travel for these ships. So
how much money is this costing importers and exporters if they have to detour around the Red Sea?
It's said that it's making each trip about 10% more expensive. And if you equivalent that, where think about it in the personal perspective, the amount of money you're earning and spending, you have to account for a 10% expenditure. You're spending a lot more money than you think you should. So this makes every cost of good go up. It makes your travel time. So who you're paying, the crew that's on the ship, that goes up. So things just will get more expensive, basically. So everything from like Europe to China, places in India, like they'll feel it more than anything because this is where most of the travel is coming through.
So I have a million things that I could say about this topic. I wanted this to be my topic. I had so much to say about it. I think that this small situation in the Red Sea is such a masterclass in propaganda, internet usage, and basic optics, and what the Houthis are doing in relation to the Israeli-Gaza war. And so, just for example, Jared, I know you mentioned the ships that were in the Red Sea and whatnot. The Eisenhower is now returning to Norfolk. It's on its way back, and it was sent back probably a couple days ago now. Its deployment had been extended 3 times outside of what it should have been, but they kept it out there because they put it in the Red Sea and they kept it in the Mediterranean when tensions started escalating. But once it finally was recalled, Houthis and pro-Gazan news outlets, reporters, Twitter people, what have you, all basically started spouting off, and they were like, oh, the Americans are leaving, the Americans are scared, they don't want to get hit by a missile strike, when in reality, the ship has just been out longer than it needs to be. We're not scared and we're not running. And so that's a perfect example of everything that's going on in the Red Sea. You have to hand it to them. They are masterfully using the happenings of geopolitics right now. Like if you heard about the news where U.S. helicopters sank 3 Houthi speedboats and killed 10 Houthi soldiers, I suppose. And every single
soldiers
place,
is a generous term.
Correct, I know.
Rebels.
Every single
These
place.
are fucking peasants with AKs on fishing boats that you use on the lake.
They were not referred to as that. Well, they were being called martyrs. They were being called, brave soldiers, all this other shit, basically. And they're condemning America. We killed 10 innocent Houthis. Oh, they were defending their territorial waters. The Houthis were operating in international waters, and Americans were responding to a distress call from a shipping vessel that was under attack from Houthi pirates who attempted to board the vessel in international waters. But then the second America kills these 10 guys and stops the pirate attempt, we're now bad because we've martyred 10 individuals and, completely unjustified, unwarranted, not like anybody called for help or anything.
Well, if they're that pissed off, they should send us some more peasants to martyr.
Yeah, they struck one of the shipping vessels with an RPG. So, and they're talking about how, we're the bad guys. Like, they attacked this shipping vessel. They tried to board it and take it over. And this is when the U.S. came in, and they sent out a couple of helicopters, and they intercepted another missile that didn't end up striking the vessel again. So, and then they fucked these dudes up. But in response to them trying to take over a container vessel. So, we're not the bad guys. It's just, it is a great, it's a great optics, mission they're doing. Optical illusion. Yes, it's a great optical illusion of right and wrong, because we're the bad guys because we're the ones killing the Houthis, and the Houthis are the bad guys because we're the ones defending all these shipping vessels. So
there's an important point to be made that in this age of information, or the age of disinformation, there's no such thing as good guy and bad guy. There's just you and me, them and us. And whoever has the better propaganda machine is going to win the propaganda battle. But then when it comes to boots on the ground, it's going to be no contest.
Correct. I think what's super interesting about this whole dynamic, because realistically, the sinking of these Houthi small craft and these poor souls that thought they could take it to the American war machine, with AKs and speedboats, by the way, were maybe just a little bit outgunned. But it's interesting to me, the patience displayed by the American military in not responding to these, constant drone attacks, these missiles that are being launched at them. We didn't provoke this by our presence there, and as Justin laid out and as Jared laid out, we were responding to a distress call from a vessel in international waters that was being attacked by these individuals who happened to be Houthi soldiers, rebels, whatever moniker fits your narrative. At the end of the day, they were committing piracy, and you don't do that in international waters when the United States of America is nearby, and that was a pretty clear example of why. So, I don't feel bad, or I don't feel anything other than kind of almost impressed at the lack of American response to this aggression, because they obviously have the capability to respond with overwhelming firepower at any of the situations that have been thrown at them. And for me to constantly see these news reports of 11 more drones shot down by U.S. destroyers, if I was the captain of the destroyer, I'm not sure that I would have been so level-headed, and that's a warm, it warms my heart to know that.
You'd have been
correct.
11 drones. Let's point the guns at them, and let's
correct.
A couple other messages that they can get.
Mm-hmm. So it's so counter the narrative of American aggression that we didn't do that, and I think that love it or hate it, the people in charge of the American military are wise, and they're experienced, and they know that the optics would be so far against them if they did respond to that. So that they haven't, but I'm thankful that they chose the hand of, deference and taking the higher road there, because we have the capability to not do that. And, as Will just very well laid out, there's a huge difference between support on the internet, support on Twitter, people screaming in inboxes and going, we're the best, we're resisting this or that. Historically speaking, when Americans put their boots on the ground in the Middle East, we're undefeated, dog. It's not even close.
The Houthi are just trash talking sore losers who are complaining that when it came down to the shoulder pads and faceplates doing the talking, they couldn't win. And so now they're just quoting and tweeting out, or sorry, whatever it is that you put on X nowadays, in their own little echo chamber, all this anti-American bullshit. And that's all that they're going to do, because they're this little fly that's buzzing around the horse's ass, and we just swat it away with our tail.
I'd also like to point out that the justification behind all these shipping strikes are that they are supporting Gazans in their struggle against Israel. So they're targeting Israeli shipping, and they have repeatedly targeted cargo ships bound for anywhere but Israel. Italy, Singapore, Western Europe, places that are not Israel that are not, and they're not even carrying armaments or weapons. Sometimes they're just carrying crude materials or furniture or grain or being targeted.
Right. So, absolutely the optics are at play. Like anybody that is able to just take a deep breath and take a step away and just objectively look at how things are being portrayed should be able to see that there's more afoot than the simple acts of piracy that we're witnessing in the response. Like it's not all that it appears to be on paper, for sure.
Well, we amassed a pretty large response because we had a multiple other allied countries also send ships over there too. Like Britain sent a destroyer, Denmark sent a destroyer, and I think there's one other country as well that sent a destroyer into the Red Sea, basically like just calm the situation. Because they're like, I think they average about one attack every 2 days. That's how often they go after a ship. So, and it's not a small place in the Red Sea. Like it's a very, very large, like hundreds of miles from like the point of where Suez Canal all the way. It's like the Cape of Good Hope. So I think that's where the entrance is really. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of support that we have to get these ships through because it's such a vital choke point. And if they close that off, like you remember the whole Suez Canal thing, that ship got stuck, and it was like I don't know how many weeks that thing was stuck in there for, but it's important. That's why wars were fought over it for thousands of years. Like the Romans fought over it. So it was. They finally built the Suez Canal back in the 1800s, and Egypt fought. I forgot who, but Egypt had a war over it back in the early 1900s. So it's important that we keep it open just for global trade. But the Iranians that are backing the Houthis, then I think it only is going to get bigger now with like the whole spectacle of what's going to happen, because now that they have the attention of like mass media, every little thing that's going to happen, like whether somebody gets injured or a missile gets sent off, now that becomes like the next big news story, because we've now like escalated it to a point to where we have other allies that are involved. So I think everybody's on board. I think you can even ask like Russia and China if they agree with our decision making, and I think yes, because they're also being impacted the same ways that we are, because their ships also go through this at the same point that everybody else's ships go through. So do they want their ships sinking by a bunch of terrorists? No. So I think now it's only going to get bigger.
I'm reading that over 20 countries have committed to participate in essentially like international naval operations in the Red Sea. France, Italy, Spain, Britain, Greece, the Netherlands. Norway said it would send naval officers. So yeah, I mean, what I'm hopeful to see is one of the efforts of like NATO or these multinational coalitions actually doing what their intended purpose is, which is to respond as a united front. It shouldn't be America versus these Houthi rebels and these, this and this. Like, the reality is that we were there and we were the ones that responded this time, but what a much more powerful message when it's not America versus, seemingly every country out there, but it's actually, this coalition of multiple nations agreeing that, hey, we've as a collective body decided what's right and wrong and what the agreed upon avenues are to contest things, and this is outside of the scope of that. We're shutting it down. That adds credence that I'm we're not going to see on Twitter that everyone's like, wow, like NATO's really stepping in and doing something, but like it should be. Like, it's upsetting that narrative's not there.
No, I think there does need to be a need for other countries to help out too, because it's not just an American problem. So, yeah. And for the fact that the countries that are directly impacted, or at least in that vicinity, where like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Egypt, all these countries they're not dealing with it. They're letting everybody else deal with it. So, and that's where NATO comes in for it. Which kind of like it begs the question now: like, does this then like help and strengthen this idea of a consistent military presence over there? Like, are we now going to just leave all these ships and basically like have this defense set up, and everybody else just going to leave their ships over there too? Like, does this make the military industrial complex, the need for it stronger? What do you guys think?
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that we have a sustained military presence in a region just to stabilize it and, prevent disaster, well, not disaster, but just like prevent damage to shipping lanes or trade or the global economy. I mean, this really isn't that different if you look at it from that lens. I mean, this is piracy. People are in danger, and, because we're capitalists, money is at stake. And, these guys are also taking shots at Western allies, and the United States isn't going to stand for that. So, yeah, we're going to put a couple of naval ships in there. And then all of our friends said, yeah, this is a good idea. We're going to pitch in too. So it's not the first time, and it's not going to be the last time.
If, heaven forbid, these Houthis or the groups that back them are able to significantly damage one of these war vessels, whether it's through, I'm gonna use some like stroke of luck, or
they roll a 20.
That they roll a nat 20 on the luck, or they get their hands on adequate military equipment and are able to do damage.
Well, they have great missiles. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. They have great missile capabilities, so it's possible. Okay. And they have used, for the first time in recorded history, an ballistic anti-ship missile and struck a cargo ship.
Okay. What do you think's going to happen if they hit a U.S. or NATO coalition warship with one of those?
What do you
guys ever heard of Pearl Harbor?
Yeah. What do you think I think is going to happen?
I think a lot of Houthi rebels are going to die, personally. But
what's going to happen is, like, once that ship goes down and American servicemen get killed, we're going to have some 4-star admirals being like, oh, dude, we've been waiting for this. And they're going to fucking unleash on these guys. And we're going to give them the fucking 1945 Pacific treatment. We're going to kill them all.
Regardless of where you stand on the Israel-Palestine conflict, regardless of, whether you view Israel as a legitimate state or a colonizing force that's occupying Palestinian land, it's similar in that situation to this Red Sea situation where it's like, fuck around and find out. Regardless of how you feel politically, Hamas went into Israel on October 7th, killed citizens, took hostages. Israel had no choice but to respond. It's the same situation if they happen to sink an American ship, okay? Regardless of what you think about the Houthis or about America, everyone knows exactly what America is going to do. You should already know.
Yep, agree.
I agree with Justin on this.
I will not dissent in the least either. I mean, it's kind of... It's almost such a truism to understand. Like, if you just objectively zoom out for like 10 seconds, you'll see like you should not be doing this. Like, there is no logical, extension or increase in violence that they can do that doesn't result in massive loss of one side of human life.
I think we have already proven as well that an insurgency is no match for the U.S. Army in terms of firepower and capability. I'm not talking about political wins, because you can make the argument in Afghanistan, not necessarily Iraq because we were state building, but Afghanistan, Vietnam, U.S. lost. Yeah, yes, we lost the war politically, correct. It was horrible at home, and we didn't really accomplish anything. That doesn't mean you beat us.
Lost. Yeah, correct.
We beat ourselves by entering.
I'm going to throw out that line. We didn't lose. We left.
Correct.
We chose to leave.
In no way, shape, or form did we lose from a military standpoint.
Correct.
Did you guys ever see that? Did you guys ever watch that movie Cool Hand Luke?
No.
That sounds so familiar.
Okay, well, this is an old movie from the 60s. And in this movie, there's a scene where these two guys are boxing in the prison yard. And one of them is just this huge dude, and the other guy's like this skinny, scrawny guy, and this big guy just clobbers the skinny dude, puts him on the ground over and over and over again, and the skinny guy just keeps getting up, and then the ring of people around that are watching this fight, they just stop cheering because the skinny guy just keeps standing up. He just gets fucking beat down into the ground with one punch after another, but he keeps getting up and then takes like a drowsy half punch at the big guy, and the big guy just takes him and just boom, smacks him right down on the ground again. So the skinny guy ended up winning that fight because the big guy just gave up and left. Everybody stopped cheering. and it just wasn't fun to watch anymore. So this is something that you could look up on YouTube. It's a specific scene in a movie. Cool Hand Luke. I saw that, and this is immediately what I thought of.
I mean,
Might
that's
be
also
relevant for you guys too.
So
Good
rating is
reference.
Rotten Tomatoes. It's a full 100%. So it's probably a really solid movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie on its own. That scene is what stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just listening to the description of that scene almost breeds a sense of like not wanting to do this again. In me personally, like not wanting to see the U.S. need to intervene militarily and like quell this rebellion or like, you know, end several thousand people's lives because they thought they were doing the right thing.
Yeah, well,
It's
those
tough.
people
Like,
who
you know,
think they're
obviously-
doing the right thing want to kill Americans.
Absolutely, they do.
This is also such a long-standing conflict, and I don't mean the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I mean the Yemeni conflict. It's been going on since the early 50s. It's been referred to as Egypt's Vietnam because Egypt deployed tens of thousands of soldiers there throughout the 60s and 70s trying to fight the Houthis, trying to support who they wanted to support. I mean, there's so many rebel groups and so many nuances. It's just ridiculous. I don't really think we have any business being involved, but like Will said, yeah, they want to kill Americans. So if they kill Americans, we already know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
All right,
tough.
I think this topic has run aground in a standpoint. So, is there anything else that we're going to shift over to?
Ben?
I was gonna make a joke about beaching the Bismarck or beaching what was it, the Japanese battleship?
Yamamoto.
Yamamoto?
Yeah, beaching the Yamamoto and just like firing back. Can't sink a grounded vessel, baby. Yes, you can.
You can't sink it, but you can blow it up.
Yeah, you can sink the ground that it's beached on into the ocean with enough shell fire. My topic is a little bit more open-ended than Will's and Jared's, but it's definitely a detachment and a more historical focus. But I wanted to get into the weeds a little bit on the Mongol Empire with you guys, because I've gone down a rabbit hole the last couple weeks, and you know found a lot of my perceptions and thoughts and the focus of my understanding of history to be very like Western and very Europe focused. And you know, like I'll get into like Egyptian history or Persian history, but like I know, you know, comparatively little about things that were going on in the Far East, as far as Chinese history, Mongol history. You know, throughout much of the Dark and Medieval Ages and the Middle Ages, and having stumbled upon The Wrath of the Khans by Dan Carlin, kind of had my worldview shaken a little bit and learned like, you know, these facets of history that I really, you know, feeling now that like should be common knowledge, because, you know, the Mongols just during Genghis Khan's reign killed almost as many people as died during some of like the World War I, World War II, like, you know, up to potentially 80 million people died in 100 years of Mongol conquests and ruling, you know, pretty much the largest empire the world has ever seen. And like, I didn't know any of that 2 weeks ago. And it's almost crazy that so many people's lives were just swept under the rug and, you know, disguised in this now present idea of Genghis Khan as like an innovator and a bringer of trade from, you know, the Far East to the West. And you know, the Mongolians put him on their money and he's their George Washington, but he also killed like more people than Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler did. Like that's, and this was like 900 years ago also. Like this wasn't recent. Like
He single-handedly, it's been argued that he single-handedly had the most profound effect on human population and on global climate.
100%.
For a couple years, the
Yeah.
temperature dropped because there were
Bro,
less.
let's add to Genghis Khan's resume that he was the number one advocate for fighting against global warming. He said, we need to make a difference, and I'm going to take that personally.
I'm going to take this into my own hands.
Yeah, he was
Correct.
ESG reporting back then.
Correct.
Can you imagine Genghis rolling into your village and basically having a huge speech and saying like, we are all going to take on global warming and you're all going to help me. And they're like, yeah. And then they all unsheathe their swords and you're like, wait,
you're like, oh no. and to just kind of elaborate a little bit, like we have this preconceived notion of what the Mongols look like, what they were, and there can be absolutely no doubt about it. They were a people from the steppe. They were nomadic horse archers at their base. But what this podcast series did a really good job of emphasizing, and what I needed to learn was, when Genghis Khan was a young man, that's what his tribe looked like. And by the time he died, he had an empire basically the size of the Roman Empire and had conquered China multiple times. And his son led an expedition that went all the way into Hungary, and multiple times they bested the best armies that Europe could throw at them, and the largest, with gunpowder weapons. They were using, early forms of artillery. There's historical accounts of this Hungarian army holding a bridge being shelled by exploding cannonballs in the 1200s, like in 1250. And the Mongols were advancing behind this artillery barrage. And so this idea of just this overwhelming number of nomadic steppe archers with shooting arrows at you can disguise a lot of the elegance and the sophistication that these troops were bringing to the table. What a lot of these Mongols would do is, when they would conquer a nation or a people, they would incorporate them into their military and take the best facets of what they could do and add it to their already formidable military power. And so, once the Mongols had defeated China, there really was no equal competitor at their level as far as sophistication, size, the armies that they could draw up. They went to war with the Khwarezmian Shah, and from 7 different directions invaded his empire with 7 different armies and encircled, tens and hundreds of cities and blew them up and killed every single person, man, woman, and child inside of them. And I didn't know about it, and I don't think most casual history fans that aren't from Asia have any notion of any of this. Like it absolutely beggared belief for me. So I guess I'll
the Chinese definitely know. Yeah. Also, shout out to the Great Wall, because that's the whole reason it's there.
Bro, so before the Great Wall existed, there was a less Great Wall, but still pretty formidable wall. And the Chinese at the time that relied on this to keep the Mongols and the steppe people out, stationed a recently conquered group of steppe nomad adjacent people in these forts, and we're like, all right, you guys were really formidable warriors. We had to fight really hard to beat you. We're going to put you in here and have you guys fight off these Mongols as they invade our nations. And the Mongols showed up and they're like, hey, you know what? We really don't like these people. Here's the keys to the fortress, bro. You can just come through. And that was pretty awkward. And 12-15 for the Chinese. It'd be like the French giving the Germans the Maginot Line keys and being like, hey, bro, we weren't actually going to use this on you. Here you go. Could you imagine?
There's a story that growing up where they talked about they were building the Great Wall, and they had a bunch of slaves and just a bunch of workers working on the Great Wall. And they were fighting battles around it. And you just see your buddy next to you just get his head cut off. You're like, oh, I'm going to put the brick back. And you're still building the wall as shit's going on behind you. I thought that's just a wild picture to think of.
Yeah, I remember reading even as a kid and now 15, 20-year-old history books that people would die and they would just throw them in to the wall to fill it in.
Your mortar.
Yep, congratulations. You are now a building brick in the intolerable wall.
That's why it's so sturdy.
I believe that fact was taken advantage of in one of the Mummy movies, where they raised an army of the dead from within the Great Wall to fight off an army of demons. Or no, it was the Terracotta
Army. Yeah.
The Terracotta Army to fight off, fighting an army of zombies summoned from within the Great Wall from all the people who died putting it together.
Why haven't they remade those movies yet? That sounds awesome.
They made
Brendan Fraser gained a lot of weight.
I was going to say Brendan Fraser's playing a different kind of role now.
Yeah, fair.
He's winning awards for movies about him being an overweight homosexual.
Yeah. Not to
I'm
segue
sorry,
away from
is that wrong?
No, I'm not.
He's straight in the whale.
Yeah, it's the whale. He won He won an award for his portrayal in The Whale.
Yeah, but he's straight in The Whale. He's just overweight.
Yeah.
No,
He's just fat.
I didn't watch
He's
it.
okay.
We'll strike that. We'll edit that part out.
No, we won't. But no, so but the biggest thing that I wanted to emphasize about this is, you know, if you come from America or from Europe, like you have this very like Western centric idea of history and sophistication and, you know, this level of ethnocentrism that the Mongols quickly dispelled for, you know, the entire world once they got done dealing with China. You know, they were besting armies that sometimes outnumbered them 3, 4, 5 times, you know, 5 people to 1 person, handily. And we're doing this, you know, year after year after year, and just crushing these armies that were being raised to go fight in the Crusades. And they were fighting both the Muslims and the Christians at the same time. And it was so bad that the Muslims sent emissaries as far as Scotland requesting aid from their mortal enemies at the time, the Christian nations, saying, hey, as bad as our conflict is, as we're killing each other over Jerusalem, there's something way worse going on over here, and we should really think about working together because we're all going to die. The Great Khan at the time had hypothesized that it would take him 18 years to conquer all of Europe to the Atlantic Ocean. And they were ahead of schedule about a year and a half into the conflict after crushing Hungary. And, you know, thankfully for Western Europe, Obadiah, the son of Genghis Khan, died, and their nation kind of regressed into like internal fighting. But it was looking pretty rough for Christian Muslim Europe at the time.
Well, they had an ending very similar to the Hellenic Empire underneath Alexander the Great after his death, and it was split between 4 of his generals. I'm almost positive that's exactly what happened after the Great Khan died. I mean, it was split 3 or 4 ways and was never the same afterwards.
Yeah. Well,
For
so
those of you who have played the video game Stellaris, this is exactly what happens in the mid-game crisis.
True.
Shout out to Stellaris fans.
Correct. Paradox out here, keeping it real. You're right, Justin. The Great Khan actually did something that truly separates him from almost any of the other greats, historically speaking. He set himself up with a clean transfer of power from his death to his next successor. It was unfortunate that his successor died very young, unexpectedly, and the transfer of power from that, you know, leader to the next is really where it broke down, and it copied much of the history of other greats. You know, obviously Alexander the Great's empire fell apart. Julius Caesar died, and you know, then we had a bunch of emperors after that. But
I got a question for you guys. Who are some other people in history that are worthy of the moniker great, but are not typically prescribed such?
You mean great like they're benevolent, or great like they did great things? And I don't mean great things like good things. I mean great like they accomplished incredible feats.
Kind of like they accomplished incredible feats. Like Napoleon the Great would be a perfect
yes,
example.
Napoleon.
It's actually
so
a book.
Are you talking people as individuals or people
Yeah.
as? Okay, I thought you were saying like nations. Okay,
People as individuals. Like Napoleon.
I mean, my immediate thought. Go ahead, Jared.
The slept on one would be the Emperor of Japan during World War II, Emperor Hirohito. So that'd be my choice.
Interesting.
Why is that?
I'm not sure Nagasaki and Hiroshima think he's that great.
Explain yourself, Jared.
There was a biography that I wrote that I read on him talking about his life, and he just struck me as like a really stoic and interesting guy in the way that he handled his politics. During his reign, he had to fend off takeovers from his political allies and then also the military, because there were separate sides of how everything was governed. So he just organized everything very strategically, and I think that if not given for the events of World War II, he'd be looked at differently.
100%. A lot of people do not understand the significant, you know, difference between how Japan had been operating up to that point and the just absolute opacity of how their government functioned and politics and military influence, and how like even like privates and corporals in the military would like make decisions or like do things like invade China, and the government would have to like bend over backwards to like cover their tracks and be like, yeah, like we actually wanted to do this the whole time, and the whole time they're like, please. So definitely,
Justin?
What's up, Will?
I was wondering if Justin had any input on the great question.
I mean, I would definitely say Augustus as one, or I mean Octavian, if you want to call him Octavian. You know, basically who inherited Julius Caesar's blueprint. He was his nephew, and then was slated to be the first real emperor of Rome. And that, you know, he ruled during the Pax Romana. Like that's he is the reason the Roman Empire was what it was, and based upon everything that he incorporated in the peace that he held, in the wars that he fought, I think he did great things. And I also think this might be kind of a strange one. I don't know, but if we're just saying great feats, however you want to measure that, I would almost say Haile Selassie, just from a sheer
Who's that?
The Ethiopian leader?
Correct. Yeah, from the sheer willpower standpoint, like, you know, resisting invasion the first time, and then continuing to persevere after the Italians conquered them during World War II, and then, you know, continuing to come home, and albeit, you know, personal feelings about him aside, being an autocratic ruler and maybe ruling with a heavy hand and whatnot, stabilizing his state in the face of adversity and setting Ethiopia up to be, you know, what it is today. I suppose not like it's a shining example of a super state, but I think in terms of being great, a great level of perseverance. Sure.
I gotcha.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm racking my brain right now, and a lot of the people that I'm thinking of are already historical figures. But I think Joan of Arc was the first one that like popped into my head that might not have had like the moniker the Great attached to her, that I think like truly was an exceptional historical figure. Also a woman, so pretty cool. But other than that, my immediate thoughts went to, you know, like true innovators in either the way that the world works now. Guys like Henry Ford or Teddy Roosevelt was another
Henry
guy
Ford,
that I thought of. Have
I
you
learned
seen
some
his
fucked up
bit?
shit about Henry Ford earlier today?
What'd you say?
I
What?
learned some fucked up shit about Henry Ford.
Henry
today.
Ford fucking sucks.
Yeah. I learned that in order for him to get the rubber he needed for all of his cars, he had to go in and basically like wipe out tribes in Brazil, and he basically like have these people just work for him for nothing, or he would kill them.
Dude,
so
killed indigenous people for rubber, Nazi sympathizer, received the literal highest civilian award, Friend of the Reich, employed a Ford's private security force to kill and bust union workers, and also gave us the 5-hour, 40-hour work week. So
yes.
I was gonna say, have you guys seen the Family Guy skit where he's like, "I show you the Jew flattener," and it's the Model T, and he's like, "You can get in it and flatten any Jew," and the guys are looking at it and they're like, "But you could like just get in it and like, you know, go somewhere if you wanted to," and he's like, "What? No, this is a Jew flattener." He's like, "Yeah, but like you could like theoretically like you could just drive, right?" And he's like, "What do you know? That's not what this is for."
They built the car.
Ben, when you edit this video, you're gonna put that in there, right?
Yeah, if I can do that without getting like copyrighted somehow, absolutely. Yeah, but no, I definitely wasn't picturing Henry Ford as like the shining example of morality or a good person, because clearly he was a dirtbag, and but you know, he did accomplish great things. Again, not saying that what he did was justified in any way, shape, or form, because that dude sucks. But Teddy Roosevelt was the other one that popped into my head. FDR.
J.D. Rockefeller.
Hey,
Dude, also kind of sucks. Also kind of sucks, but come on, you got to give it to him, bro. He said, y'all ain't seen nothing yet. You want to see something? Let me show you.
Want to see something? I'm going to show you something real quick. Yeah. He's like, "How much do I got? If you know, it's not a lot."
Was he the one that bought U.S. Steel? Or who?
Johnny Rockefeller founded Standard Oil.
Standard Oil, okay.
Right, Vanderbilt was the steel guy.
The richest man in all of history.
American history.
Oh, come on. What are you going to say, Mansa Musa?
No, I was gonna say
No,
like
I'm
probably
gonna
one
say
of those
Genghis
homies
Khan,
sitting in
actually.
Saudi Arabia right now.
I'm going to say
adjusted
Genghis
for
Khan
inflation?
or Julius Caesar. Adjusted for inflation and taking into account the value of land and the value of slaves.
True. It's probably. I mean, Genghis Khan's got a pretty solid option up there.
In terms of cash, yeah, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan. No, like nobody.
Hang on.
But in terms of like total net worth, it's going to be Julius Caesar. He's probably the world's first trillionaire.
$4.6 trillion estimated.
Who?
Damn, Joseph Stalin was above him, but that would be the same
What?
argument as like.
Okay.
Wait, Tim, I'm just telling you what this article's saying. Don't murder me yet.
You guys are measuring in terms of wealth.
You
You
gotta
got to
share
measure
that
the will of the
screen, bro.
people. Okay, that's why
Share that
Stalin was
screen.
so rich.
Here we go. You ready? Here we go. Share this screen. This is probably so garbage of a source. But
Definitely.
anyway, 120 mil for the Great Khan himself.
What? That's
What a
it?
fire painting.
120 trill. Sorry, trill.
Oh, trillion. Okay.
Wait, who's number one?
I don't know about this. That's bullshit.
Estimated net worth is
Incomprehensible.
incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Genghis Khan wins this one. We're back. Yeah. Here's the thing: if your country's got a lot of gold, that's comprehensible wealth. If you control, hang on one second. Let me just pull up a map real quick. Empire, stand by. If you control this much of the Earth, you're probably doing all right for yourself.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. And then think about the fact that he's got every single man, woman, and child in all of those places paying taxes and also R-wording and pillaging all of the towns and cities that have anything worthwhile and taking that wealth for himself. You're going to have some money. And everybody he didn't kill became a slave. So congratulations. You get an upgrade from dead to indentured servitude for life.
To some people, that's a no-brainer.
Some people.
Some people.
Crazy.
I'm curious
Anyway,
what
yeah.
Justin's topic is.
Yeah, Justin.
All right, so my topic is less of a topic. It's going to contain whatever you guys want to talk about when I pose the question, but it's an open-ended
Oh,
question.
I'm so game.
And this is what I was saying.
I'm
If
so
Will
game.
hasn't gotten
I'm
himself
so game.
canceled yet, don't worry, because I'm gonna lob this shit up, and he's just gonna take it away. So I'll pose the question. It's a question of ethics. To what extent does pragmatism excuse unethical behavior? And I'll give you some examples when I pose this question. One that pops into my mind. I am so sorry, Ben. I don't know if you're going to have to edit this or if it's fine. I have a baby in here, but I just need her to be calm and I need her to be okay. So I'm going to just have her with me for a second.
So, Justin, your question is, to what extent does pragmatism excuse unethical behavior?
Correct. Like, I guess if you were going to dumb that down, to what extent do the ends justify the means? And so an example I'll give you is Sherman's march to the sea during the Civil War. To me, completely justified. And if you live in the South, which I do now, but if you're a Southerner who's still salty about the Civil War, Ben, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. It was in the South. If you're a Southerner, you might be pretty butthurt about this still because he destroyed all infrastructure that was even present here, burned houses.
Especially if you live in Atlanta.
Correct, especially if you live in Atlanta, and did that shit all the way across the country. You know, we have that. You could argue, was dropping atomic bombs on Japan? You know, are 2 bombs dropped in order to force an unconditional surrender better than hundreds of thousands of American lives being lost? You could argue during the rebuilding of Iraq, during Iraqi state security forces, you know, cracking down on what they viewed as militant Islamic militants, cracking down a little hard, killing people that weren't actually militants, trying to stamp that out. I don't know if I'd excuse that one. But I'm just throwing some examples your way, and I'm lobbing it, and I would like to hear what Will has to say first.
All right. Well,
hey, real quick, before I'm sorry, I want to let you go first. Justin, can you kill your camera while Lucy's on screen?
Yes.
specifically because I have to choose whether or not kids are present in this video.
Oh, dude, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Yeah,
You're good.
I can't. I just
No,
don't.
please, no, there is absolutely no apology needed. But yeah, you're good, Will. Sorry.
Okay. So Justin's question was, to what extent does pragmatism justify unethical behavior? And I believe this also means like immoral behavior, because there's a big difference that everybody needs to understand of the difference between morality and ethics. Morality is like plain old good and bad according to our own societal norms. It's immoral to keep somebody out in the cold when they're asking for help. Unethical is like if you do something that is counterproductive to your goals, that is unethical. Like we have in the federal government, we have an agent, like an ethics agency. We do not have a morality agency in the federal government. And that ethical agency exists to make sure that the government does what it's in its own best interests, or that the people who represent that government do what's in their own best interests. If Justin means to ask me about pragmatism and ethics, as well as pragmatism and morality, then if you're being completely pragmatic, there is no boundary whatsoever. And to Justin's examples, if we were going to drop those atomic bombs at Japan to make them surrender, that's what we had to do, because it would have been unethical to not do that. Because if we didn't drop those atomic bombs on Japan, World War II would have gone on until at least 1947, and probably 600,000 to 1.5 million American servicemen would have died, not casualties, dead. And then in terms of Japanese, you're looking at 10 million casualties. Because when they were getting ready for the Americans to invade, they were training women and children in like the town square with bamboo spears, getting ready to repel the American invader. We dropped 2 bombs, killed 110,000 people, and that was it. War over. If we would have invaded, it would have lasted way longer. Way more people would have died, and it would have become way more complex. And for Sherman's March to the Sea, the South wasn't going to surrender. So we did what we had to do to make them wave that white flag. We didn't drop an atomic bomb on them, but we put the pressure on them. And we hit them where it hurts, because we wanted the war to be over. It was no way that the South was going to win at this point. And we did what we had to do to put an end to it. So if you're being completely pragmatic, there is no limit to what you can do if you want to achieve your goals. If you have other things that you're worrying about, like public opinion or the opinions of your allies, then yeah, you're going to have to take that into consideration. But ultimately, if you're going to be 100% uncompromisingly pragmatic, there's nothing you won't do.
Thank you, Will. I agree with you, Ben. I want to have you have the opportunity, but I love what you said about, making the making the distinction between ethics and morals, because maybe okay.
She has a very strong opinion.
Lucy wants
too.
to say something.
She has extremely strong opinions. So Sherman's March to the Sea, burning all that infrastructure, was it unethical? I mean, you could argue so, yes, because he displaced people, he stole their food, he destroyed their hard-earned creations. But was it immoral? No, and this is where it gets a little subjective, I think, to each individual. I don't think it was immoral, because I think the Union was fighting a moral fight against the South. We were fighting against the institution of slavery. Now, if you're a Southerner, you're going to have a different set of quote-unquote morals, and it's going to be a little more subjective in your eyes. But I 100%
I got tough news for these Southerners. The victors write the history textbooks. The war was about slavery. Deal with it.
So, Ben, what do you have to say?
I'm so glad you asked, Justin. My immediate thoughts are, and I was going to pose this question before you asked me my thoughts, but it everything that you used as an example, and that Will, also went in on as far as an example, brought to mind this image of a people that had been defeated, effectively and pretty much irrevocably on the field of battle, that were refusing to yield. And that's definitely the case for the Japanese in World War II by 1945. They were crushed. Like, there was no world that they would win a conflict. Their only victory would have been delaying their defeat and maybe, getting more favorable peace terms by killing as many Americans as they could, even though they were suffering probably close to a 100-to-1 casualty ratio of Allied soldiers to, their own citizens. Same thing for the Civil War. By the time that Sherman is running amok on the eastern seaboard of America, burning down every city he can get his hands on, from Richmond to Atlanta, Georgia, if the South had a military that could contest the North and the field, they probably would have put a stop to that. But they didn't, because they were beaten. They were just not willing or unable to understand their position to the point where they felt compelled to yield. And so in those examples, I see the validity of needing a shock or a decisive push to try and get this, what would account to be like a dazed or a stunned, or somebody that just like got like knocked out, like coming back to their senses. Like they couldn't make the right decision, which was to throw in the towel and save more human lives. What it brought to my mind was these Houthi rebels. Like, in no world are they a military threat to NATO or to America or to Israel. Like they're not militarily at this level. They're talking the game at the highest level, but there's no world in which they can militarily achieve the objectives that they have. Do we demolish them and everything they stand for, and turn the buildings that they used to live into dust, to prove the point that like they never should have done that in the first place? Or do we abide and say, we're not going to do that? And that's kind of what this boils down to me. And so I'd posit that question. My own personal ethos on this, by the way, I believe that the atomic bombings were justified on Japan, on a number of grounds. Not because it saved American lives. I don't believe that American lives are implicitly more valuable than the Japanese lives that were lost, which may be a controversial topic. But I do believe that more lives overall, both American and Japanese, were spared by the bombs being dropped than if they hadn't done so. More people died in Tokyo in one day of firebombing that the U.S. dropped on them than in either Nagasaki or Hiroshima. If you combined,
talks about it.
Nobody ever talks about it, and it's not like that wasn't happening nightly and daily to every medium to large, village, let alone city in Japan every single day. And it was now at the point where both Britain and the Soviet Union's forces were arriving and also attacking Japan and Japanese-held assets. It's not like Japan wasn't getting absolutely demolished, or that their people were dying in the hundreds of thousands by the week. We just focus on these two instances where 40,000 people died, 80,000 people died. Which, don't get me wrong, I don't want to diminish or take away from the impact of that, right? Like, they lost their lives at the hands of atomic weapons. Is that truly any worse than someone watching 18 square miles of Tokyo burn up over 4 hours and 100,000 of their relatives die as they can't escape an inferno that literally boiled the rivers and turned, bomb raid shelters into ovens where people just roasted to death? Like, people don't talk about this because it's not flashy, it's not sexy, and it's not cool to be upset when your country's bombing civilians that are helpless to defend themselves.
All right, boo.
Okay, get this guy out of here. But
there's also a prominent Air Force general that was on record as stating if we had lost, he absolutely would have been tried for war crimes.
Curtis LeMay?
I believe so. Yeah,
it's got to be Curtis LeMay, bro. He was the one carpet bombing Japan.
Yeah, he was like, good thing we won.
Correct. Yeah, no, and absolutely. Like, the only reason that the bombings on Japan slowed down prior to the atomic bombings was because Curtis LeMay, the Air Force general at the time, or excuse me, the Army aviators general at the time, the Air Force wasn't its own department yet, was because he had bombed Japan so much so quickly that the United States was incapable of getting enough bombs to him quick enough to continue his pace of bombings.
Curtis also has a quote before he dropped, or before the two atomic bombs were bombed, that he said there were nothing but, and I quote, garbage can targets left in Japan by the time we dropped the atomic bomb. Like, by the time we dropped Fat Boy, Fat Man and Little Boy, like, Tokyo was taken off the priority targeting list. It was already a pile of rubble.
Okay,
correct.
I'm so sorry to interject, but Will, what you just said, can you imagine if the bomb was called Fat Boy and Little Man? I just think
it'd probably be the same thing as Fat Man and Little Boy. They would do the same thing, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Also, for
no,
those of you who don't know,
good.
the Soviet Union did participate in the Pacific War. Look up Operation August Storm. It's a military report that was published in the 1980s. And you can read about the operations of the Red Army in Manchuria fighting. This is the largest army that the Soviet Union put into World War II. It is the most advanced and most experienced army that ever saw combat on a widespread scale. And they are fighting the largest land army that Japan ever put into World War II. So please look it up. It's a fascinating read. Yes, it is written like a military report, but it gives you a very clear picture on what the Red Army was capable of in 1945.
What was
as
that
well
called?
as what the Operation August Storm. And it also gives you a very clear picture on what the Japanese were doing in Manchuria and how they were treating their largest standing army at the end of World War II. Because by the time the Soviets crossed that border into Manchuria, the Japanese government had taken all their best troops, their heaviest anti-tank equipment, all their explosives, and they sent them off to the Pacific to fight off the Americans. So by the time the Soviets rolled in, these guys were basically it was basically an all-infantry force with bolt-action rifles fighting off heavy Soviet tank divisions. And it's a fascinating read because they still fought.
Yeah, and that's one thing that nobody else wants to give credence to is Japan, even after the two atomic bombs, wasn't unified or even close to unified on the idea of surrender. They were still of the opinion that they could just hold out and get more favorable peace terms. Like, it was bananas. And nobody understands. Like, we're looking at this from a 70 plus year removed, cold blood, cold temper. Like, we're not upset. Like, our family members aren't dying. Like, people aren't coming home from this war, like missing limbs, with night terrors that are impacting our communities. Like, we're sitting here objectively looking at, like, was this right or wrong? It's just the logical extension of what we've been doing to each other for 6 years. I'm not to say that we should be atomically bombing or thermonuclear bombing one another now, but it was just the evolution of warfare.
I would just like to say,
Justin, do you have any more input?
The luxury of arguing the morality of something is a byproduct of success, of winning.
I was about to say victory.
We would not be arguing whether it was moral or not had the Empire of Japan defeated us. And I can promise you that every person who sits on their high horse and makes this argument, you would not be doing that if Japan had defeated us.
Correct.
Also a byproduct of success in a democracy or a democratic republic.
Correct.
With freedom of speech
Because I can
and
tell you
expression.
what, the Red Army, the members of the Red Army and the Soviet people were most definitely not debating the morals of their victory against Nazi Germany. Rightfully so. They had a much different experience, but
yeah, I'll piggyback on Justin. We have no concept in anywhere in the last 300 years at least of any kind of warfare as British colonists to what we currently are as Americans to match what the war in World War II against the Japanese was like in the Pacific theater, but especially what the war between the Soviets and the Russians was like in the Battle of the East.
Soviets and who?
The Soviets and the Germans, sorry. During World War II. Like, that was like total war. That was a war of extermination where the Germans weren't just trying to kill the Red Army. Like, they were like demolishing every town they could get their hands on. They were killing every civilian they could because they were trying to exterminate the population to move in and populate it with Germans. And at the same time, raping women. They were committing horrific war crimes against children, against elderly. Like, it was awful. And so little of that is filtered into our content, our media, our understanding of what World War II was like, because we focus on the horrors of, the Holocaust. That's our perception of the evil Germans, but they were doing just as bad, if not worse, things to the Russians all throughout the war, and it's so little known. It's crazy.
As Dan Carlin put it, the Eastern Front was a fight of bad guy versus bad guy.
Correct.
Yeah, I know Will probably has more to say, and I'd like to hear if Jared has any thoughts, that he can share on this. But I would, just as a little bit of an aside, I'd like to say the Russian and the German thing, Ben, that just made me think that, yep, again, lots more opinions. The American psyche and the American thought process from a military or a victory or a losing standpoint is in direct juxtaposition to the Russian psyche, because America is arguably the safest, most uninvadable country in the world. And the Russian existence is based upon having your country be destroyed and invaded and persevering and enduring. Russian existence is suffering. An American existence is indulgence and entitlement. And so
Thank God for that.
Correct.
Yeah, no kidding. But, it's just important to keep in mind. I mean, they were invaded by the French.
So anyways, now that Lucy's letting us know her thoughts, Jared, you want to go ahead, dude? Anything you want to say?
All I want to say is just whatever truth you believe, and talking about like the Russian ideas and the American ideas as far as suffering and overindulgence, that's what pragmatism means to like each person. Like whatever truth that you're living is that idea. So that's my take on it.
100%. Interesting. Okay. Well, I guess I would like to, or maybe even it's just a return to Justin's original, topic, but like pragmatism and morality are obviously not the same thing, but they're conflated to be the same. And, I am of the opinion that I'm incredibly thankful that there's no world conflict at scale or of an intensity that even anywhere approaches, World War II, World War I, Vietnam, anything like that. Like,
Not yet.
And hopefully it continues that way. We're in this period that's, currently called the Long Peace. And obviously there's been war and well, there hasn't been World War, but there's been like the Vietnam War, Korean War, everything going on in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Israel. There's been these conflicts, Taiwan, but like none of that's impacting our lives on a daily basis here. And I pray that continues for the most of the world. Like South America is not currently impacted by the stuff going on with these Houthi rebels, other than, potentially trade.
They are about to be impacted when Venezuela annexes Guyana.
When Venezuela does what?
When Venezuela annexes 1 to 2/3 of Guyana. Just wait. It's going to happen. You guys don't know anything about that? Sorry. Don't let me
No.
About this, but your explanation would probably get everybody up to speed pretty good.
Well, I don't want to take away from Ben's little... But Ben, why don't you finish your main topic first?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, we exist in this pocket, this chasm, this exception to the rule of history of pretty significant worldwide peace and prosperity and safety. Like all of the luxuries that we as Americans, but also much of the world is benefiting from right now, have never been the case for anyone, before the year 19, access to clean water, to clean food, for the most part. Obviously there's exceptions to this, but like, throughout most of human history, you had to struggle every single day to just survive and to get food and to get water. And we take so much of that for granted now that we're able to have these conversations as to whether or not it was moral for our country to do one thing or the other. It's just funny. It's interesting. You lose your perspective.
So it turns out the Venezuelan Guyana issue is a centuries-long, well, maybe not centuries-long, but it's a years-long border dispute that suddenly got really bad because oil was discovered.
Oh, Venezuela and Guyana?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, the Venezuelan and Guyanan borders were just drawn up by the British. Reoccurring theme throughout history. And they pretty much just drew a map, and they were like, yeah, this looks good, without consulting any of the people that actually lived in those countries. And it's been relatively peaceful for the past 100 years until, like Will stated, there was the discovery of oil. And Venezuela now is kind of harping on a historical claim that they had submitted years and years and years ago. I mean, I actually think they submitted it to the UN when the UN was first created. And then they kind of let it die out. And I'm so sorry. And then pretty much what has happened is there was oil discovered. And they held a referendum, which is pretty much just like a sham referendum. And asked Venezuelan citizens, should we annex this part of Guyana. Would you support this? Would you support the government if they did this? They basically asked the same question 5 times. And there was reported like record turnout, and everyone opted for yes. So it's just a matter of time, pretty much, that they decide to do such a thing.
Venezuela has tried doing this for a while, and Venezuela also now, I think because America has started to have more relations with them, sees this as a benefit to take over Guyana. Because for a while we sanctioned Venezuela just for a bunch of the political shit that was going on with them. But they were a huge oil producer back in the 70s and the 80s. And then since then, they've just been kind of shunned. But since the whole stuff with OPEC has happened in recent months and Russia cutting back on their oil production, we're seeking out other influences now to get that oil. And Venezuela, we were like, hey, guys, do you want to start being friends again? And they were like, yeah, we kind of do. So this is another thing that they're trying to benefit off of because they can see more money for themselves if they gain back this land.
If you guys have never seen the YouTube channel Hoser, I believe it's called, Hoser, he does a phenomenal job on breaking down the origins of countries. And his it's also, lighthearted and a little bit satirical, but his video on Venezuela is fantastic. And also, Jared, you make a fine point. Venezuela is part of OPEC. They joined back in the 70s, I believe. And additionally, they based easily 60 to 70% of their entire economy on oil. So when the oil crisis of the 70s or the 80s occurred, their currency experienced massive inflation, and they have struggled to keep up with, funding their social programs and whatnot. And it's basically just been this entire downward spiral. Definitely go watch the video. It's very good. But yeah, they've been in trouble for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Cool.
Well, guys, any closing thoughts, I guess? Do you guys feel as though this is a natural ending segue?
Would you, and I don't necessarily mean in your current lives, let's just say you are a man who is single. Would you go to the Antarctic colony to receive training to be one of the first Mars colonizers?
Absolutely
Yes.
not.
No?
What was your
not.
answer, Jared?
I said yes. I think it'd be such a cool story, just like a personal accomplishment, just to be able to like go off and have that journey. So it'd be lonely, but I think it'd be just a cool personal achievement.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jared. I think that would be the coolest thing in the world, and I've always dreamt of being the first to discover something or to like find something or to go somewhere or do I have this natural desire to want to like push the boundary there. The very little that I understand about what it would be like to colonize Mars just seems basically like a prison sentence of repetition and security protocols and just like a bland, monotonous day-to-day existence of very necessary hard tasks that I just personally don't believe I'd have the true patience to handle for the rest of me personally.
My answer would change if 2 things were different. 1, if there were nature, and 2, if there were a very large, if there were a large amount of humans that we're going with, then I would change my answer to yes. But if you're going to be in a small group on a desolate, inhospitable wasteland with no flora, no fauna, just nothing but
Me
a
and
view
12 dudes.
of the Earth, yeah.
You and the boys just not colonizing Mars together.
How much
Yeah,
alcohol
and
are
I
we
say
bringing?
that.
Okay.
Casey,
Little adjustment.
But I say that because I have my own life going on here, and I'm busy exploring like the kind of life that I'm building for myself right now. Because like where I am, both in terms of like my age and my place in this world, I'm busy exploring the life that I'm making for myself as I continue to come into my own. And I wouldn't give that up for anything, because right now the world is my oyster because I have had the luck and the hard work to create opportunities for myself. And if I don't follow through on those opportunities and at least see where they go, then I'm going to be doing myself a disservice if I go to Antarctica and step away from it all.
That makes perfect sense. Slight adjustment, and then I'll let it rest. Okay, so we're not going to Mars and we're not going to Antarctica. Maybe Jared is. I don't think I'm doing all that.
I'll read your blog, Jared.
Mid-16th century, you're a single Englishman, and they say, hey, we just found this brand new place, the New World. Are you going to America? And does that change? Because if you think about Mars in the modern context, you're worried about bureaucracy and being supervised. Would you go to America? Because there's kind of the opposite. No supervision, no nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
Ben would be like Genghis Khan.
It would honestly, okay, it would depend if I'm a persecuted religious minority or a criminal. And if I'm neither, I'm going to stay. Or like I'm probably, if I'm in poverty, yeah, I'll roll the dice. I'll see what happens. I'll gamble with the natives, but you know,
Literally,
yeah. My first thought will not be uttered on this podcast of why I wanted to go to America. But yeah, no, I'd go 100%.
You're not monetized
You're gonna tell-
anyways, bro. It's okay.
No,
Yeah,
I'll tell
you're
you guys
fine.
after the video's over.
Sure,
I would
we
not
can
say that on
pillage.
the
Okay,
podcast.
okay.
I'm all set.
all right, guys.
Oh, I say yes too. I would also go to the New World.
You go to America? Heck yeah, Jared.
Yeah.
You and me on the boats together, bro. One of us will die of
I'd love to go to
dysentery.
America.
Hell yeah, the three of us? Surely two of us will make it, right?
Will would wave us off at the docks.
Correct. You'd be
He'd be
like,
busting the
sayonara, losers.
You're like, I'm taking all your shit. See you guys later.
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we could get together and record an episode. Hopefully, we can start putting out more of this content on a more consistent basis. And who knows, maybe I'll actually put in the time and effort to like bring a little extra structure to this. But genuinely, just thankful for the conversation, the friendship, and the discourse that we're able to have as friends. Obviously, we are all somewhat alike, but appreciate seeing different viewpoints for sure. So, thanks for joining us today. And yeah, episode 12 of an intelligent discussion.